This is exactly what sugar overload feels like, all the way from the brain down to the body, down to various things you'll notice throughout the day. Now, we might understand that consuming sugar makes us feel tired, or it's not that good for us to have a lot of it. But when you start understanding the very singular things that it's doing at different levels of your body, it can give you a new sense of awareness. So not only will I talk about how sugar is impacting this when you overdo it so you can feel it and recognize it, I'll talk about what you can do for each category as far as damage control is concerned. First one, you notice that you have a bad mood. Now, bad mood is different from just feeling tired or from poor memory or things like that. Bad mood is where you're depressed, you're irritable, whole different level, right? And this can happen pretty fast. But this is something that happens more so if people have been eating too much sugar for maybe a couple of weeks, leading into a couple of months. You start noticing that people eat more sugar during the holidays and they start getting these more depressive bouts. That's just correlational, but let's look at the data here. There's a study published in Scientific Reports that took a look at over 23,200 people, and it found that there was a 23% increase in common depressive issues the more the sugar was consumed. So the more that people consume sugar, the more the instance of just common depression and anxiety. Now, this is large-scale data, but still, less sugar, less anxiety, less depression, less mood issues. But then we have to look at what's actually driving this. So there was a study published in the journal Medical Hypothesis, and what this proposed is that the reason behind the shifted mood with overdoing sugar, and by the way, overdoing sugar is very, very individualized. I can handle more sugar than Jill. Jill might handle more sugar than Bob. Bob can handle way more sugar than Jerry, right? But the first thing is inflammation. Okay, the overabundance of sugar and the inflammatory response actually impedes signaling to the brain, and it impedes how neurotransmitters function. So serotonin, dopamine, these things get disrupted. That can definitely put you in a bad mood. Then of course there's the microbiome, right? So sugar influences the microbiome, and then we have what's called the gut-brain axis that influences how we feel with that. So, okay, that's all great, but what can you do specifically for the mood side of things? Okay, the first thing that I would recommend is implement things like turmeric into your diet. That sounds so cheesy, and you might want to turn off the video because it's so like holistic, woo-woo-y weird, right? But turmeric is powerful as not only an antioxidant, but a potential anti-inflammatory. So if you're looking at countering the effects of sugar, turmeric is probably one of your more powerful bang for the buck. Now, this is not a plug for exogenous ketones either, but I will say if you're doing lower carb, exogenous ketones might come into play because they do blunt inflammation at the brain level and they provide the brain with additional fuel sources. So what you may want to consider, this is a little bit more advanced, is if you're weaning off of sugar, you can increase some exogenous ketones in the form of ketone salts or ketone esters. Again, don't have to go that route, but we've got plenty of other things we can talk about as the video goes on. The next one is the simple kind of low energy paradox. Now again, this creeps up on you, and that's what's scary, is you may not notice low energy immediately, but you might notice it after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, right? Well, the low energy paradox is sort of that, well, sugar is supposed to be energy, so wouldn't it give us energy? But the paradox is that it doesn't give you energy, it makes you crash, right? And even if it does give you short-term energy, it gives you such a crash that your ability to do exercise and non-exercise activity thermogenesis things ends up going down. So it's kind of funny because you've got the basic calories in, calories out model where people tout, oh, well, it's just food, you just got to eat enough fuel. Well, even if you are in a caloric deficit and you eat a bunch of sugar and it ends up making you inflamed and feeling like garbage, then you don't move as much, you don't exercise. So even if you're eating less, you probably end up in a surplus because you're not moving as much, right? So what is happening here? Well, there was an old study back in the 1980s. And this is interesting because they took subjects and had them eat a candy bar or they had them go for a 10-minute walk. Okay, what they found is that the paradox is that the people that went for a walk ended up having increased energy and less tension. Whereas the people that had the candy bar reported a little bit of energy for 30 or 60 minutes, but then very low energy and a lot of tension. Kind of interesting. We're adding fuel, yet we're debilitating ourselves. So how do you correct this one? Well, this one's actually simple, and it's actually a Pavlovian response thing. Every time you crave something, you go for a walk, or you do a few push-ups, or you do something active. What happens in the brain, the dopamine pathway, is very, very interesting. You can actually reprogram your brain within a month or so to recognize a completely different stimulus and want something different. So as crazy as it sounds, 10-minute walks, I know something Stan Efferding talks about all the time, could be a literal lifesaver for you. Then we move into the cravings piece. If you start finding yourself craving all kinds of things, now here's an interesting thing. If you eat a bunch of sugar and then you were put in a room without sugar for a day, but you had a phone, you'd probably check your phone 1,000 times, right? So what we don't always realize is that the dopaminergic pathway is not isolated to one medium. And what I mean by that is if you're normally on your phone all the time and stimulating your brain, and then when your phone's gone, you need to stimulate your brain. Your brain needs those dopaminergic hits, needs the dopamine hits, so you start eating and grazing, right? Very common, right? It's also like if you were to put your phone away for a day, you'd probably eat less for a day. Pretty interesting how it works. There's a study published in Nutrition Research and Practice that had subjects eat a breakfast with 2 different drinks. One group ended up having a lower sugar drink and the other group had a higher sugar drink, but they didn't know which one they got. Well, lo and behold, the higher sugar drink group ended up having more cravings throughout the day and eating more calories throughout the day. Not a huge surprise, but the funny thing is it has nothing to do with it being sweet. It has everything to do with what it's doing inside our brain, somewhat out of our control. Now, what else is interesting with this is that your dopamine receptors become desensitized. And sugar is something that's available to us all the time. So we overdo sugar 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, and then all of a sudden it's like we need more and more and more to get the same effect. So what do I suggest you do with things like this to combat this? Well, the first one is simple. It's reduce sugar as much as you possibly can. But the other side is doing things to reset and sensitize or resensitize your dopamine receptors. One of the best ways you can do this is with periodic fasting. Okay, fasting is powerful metabolically, but it's also powerful mentally. Because you are abstaining from food, you end up giving your desensitized dopamine receptors a chance to become more sensitive. What's important is that when you do break your fast, you don't eat a bunch of sugar because you're going to be very, very sensitive in many ways at the end of a fast. And it's your job and your responsibility to not totally blow that by having a bunch of sugar. So my recommendation here would be 2 days of 20-hour fasting per week for 2 months. It takes about 2 months for the dopamine receptors within your brain to sort of recalibrate so you can get back to homeostasis and not have those crazy cravings anymore. But again, you cannot be adding a bunch of sugar to your diet at the end of those fasts. If you're wondering what to eat during a fast, I have plenty of videos on that topic, but I also did put a link in the top line of the description directly below this video for Thrive Market, which is an online grocery store where you can sort by diet category. So that's a 30% off discount link. So you get 30% off whatever it is you're ordering for your entire grocery order, but you can sort by sugar-free. So literally you could just shop for whatever you want, but just check a box so it eliminates anything that has sugar in it. You can also sort by keto, by paleo, by gluten-free. It makes shopping very intuitive, but very specific for what you're looking for. Then it's delivered to your doorstep. It really is a game changer. Like, it's not like just going to a grocery store. It's next level. Just awesome stuff. So that link down below for a massive discount on your first order, plus a free $50 gift. So use that link right there, right below this video. This one is very shocking to a lot of people because they don't necessarily associate sugar in the skin. But if you're dealing with bad skin, you're dealing with wrinkles, you're dealing with oily skin, you're dealing with acne, well, it turns out there's a correlation between insulin resistance and acne/bad skin. So there's a study that was published in Advanced Dermatology and Allergy that took a look at the relationship between insulin resistance and overall just skin, like collagen, acne, things like that. They took a look at 243 people with acne and 156 control healthy subjects. They found direct correlation between the prevalence of insulin resistance and the degree of acne. More insulin resistance, or more insulin levels, I should say, more acne. Lower insulin, less acne. Healthy subjects, less acne. Pretty interesting. So with this, we have to kind of understand what's going on. Well, if insulin levels are chronically high and someone is insulin resistant and insulin can't do its job, then blood sugar will elevate and blood sugar will glycolate proteins. So it will, through what's called advanced glycation end products, it takes protein and it basically caramelizes proteins. When this happens, it does so to the proteins in our collagen, in the elastin, which is a component of collagen. So what happens here is the collagen becomes weaker and you end up with wrinkles, you end up with oily skin, you end up with dry skin, you ultimately can end up with acne. It just ends up with bad skin problems throughout. So a few things that you can do here. Okay, for one, just doing like 12-hour fasting might be really, really good just to improve the insulin resistance. Studies are demonstrating that if you just take a 12-hour break or a 14-hour break, not even legitimate fasting, that can improve insulin resistance. Not to mention, of course, cutting out sugar. Everything I talk about here comes with cutting out sugar too. So that makes a big difference. But you can also take vitamin C in a whole food form. So like acerola fruit, like anything that's not just ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is fine, but you're not going to get as much of a benefit. Vitamin C helps what's called pro-collagen. So it helps collagen form, and you have to beat it to the punch. So taking like 500 all the way up to like 3,000 milligrams of good quality vitamin C along with a collagen supplement could be very, very helpful here. But from a nutrition standpoint, applying a Mediterranean approach to your diet without going full-blown Mediterranean might work really well. Monounsaturated fats, olive oil, macadamia nut oil, avocados and avocado oil added to your diet, shellfish added to the diet, fruits, okay, things like berries, things like pears, things like apples that are rich in polyphenols, okay, not to mention adding in other kinds of lean meats, things like that are gonna give you the protein to sort of rebuild and help support that collagen formation. And then an interesting one that I've talked about in other videos, legumes, but specifically like lima beans. Lima beans have a protein that acts as an antioxidant. So any way that we can add these into the diet, for two reasons. One, they'll be additive with the antioxidants, but two, they'll replace some of the other garbage and they'll help the cravings too. So you get the antioxidant effect that could help the skin. The next thing you might notice is really cruddy sleep. Now there was a study published in 2022 that was really new here. Took a look at students and they looked at over 100 of them and they found that 17% of them slept good. Only 17% of people slept good. And they found that all the other ones that weren't sleeping good, based upon self-questionnaires, ended up having terrible eating habits, including high amounts of sugar. Pretty common for college students to eat a lot of sugar, especially when they're studying or they're just going into a new lifestyle. So that's a serious problem. The two biggest reasons that this is happening are going to be the night cravings. So they're eating too late at night, and that's messing up their sleep because they're eating too close to bed, because night cravings are very common. But number two is going to be the dopamine side of things. Okay, again, when you mess up this dopamine pathway, you're constantly seeking something. You're seeking reward. I've even had times where if my phone usage is too high, when I'm sleeping, I wake up with this desire to check my phone. This can happen subconsciously if you're not really self-aware, you don't realize what's going on. So you're hungry, you're craving things, you go to sleep, and then you wake up, but you don't realize you're just thinking about sugar or thinking about food because you're just waking up. But really that's what's happening with that dopaminergic pathway. So that needs to be corrected. Again, abstaining from food, abstaining from your phone, taking breaks to reset and sort of resensitize your dopamine receptors could help with the sleep. Of course, there's also the inflammation piece too. What I would recommend with that, red light therapy is pretty powerful for controlling inflammation, or at least modulating a little bit. Not to mention the red wavelengths are also very good for helping sleep too. So red light therapy for like 10 minutes in the morning while you're drinking your coffee could be perfect. Then we have the world of brain fog. You feel like you're losing your brain, and you feel like you have early onset neurodegenerative disease. But brain fog is a very real thing, and there was a study that was published in Diabetes Care where they gave diabetic patients a glucose clamp. Okay, so what that means is they clamped them at a certain glucose. So one group, they clamped them at over 200 milligrams per deciliter. So in that case, high glucose, right? The other group, they clamped at 81. They found within moments, there was basically an immediate effect of high blood sugar on memory, attention, and mood. So this whole time we've been saying, oh, spike your blood sugar, it's gonna give you energy, but then you'll just crash later. That's the problem. No, actually, if you spike it, everything is impaired from the get-go when it's spiked that high. Now, the people that were at the 81 common regular level of glucose, they didn't have these issues. But you're thinking this is in diabetic patients. What about in healthy people? Well, I got a study for you. There's a study that found that lower HbA1c led to better memory, better learning, and just overall better brain health. But they also found that there were larger hippocampal regions of the brain with lower HbA1c. Okay, so what this tells us is that the higher the blood sugar is for a longer period of time, the more your brain actually atrophies. It changes the tissue of your brain. So I wanted to wrap on this important note to know that independent of calories and what you're eating, sugar consumption and HbA1c and insulin resistance, for lack of a better term, rots your brain. It atrophies your brain. And that's something that we should really be concerned with. I'll see you tomorrow.